and welcome to So You Think You Can Dev, a KMS debrief on all things digital. Today we'll be discussing technology in healthcare, specifically digital health, and why 9 out of 10 digital health pilots fail. We'll be diving into why it's so difficult to innovate in healthcare and the factors that influence success. So today I'm super excited to have this conversation with Dr. Julien Willard. He is not only a doctor, but a former intelligence officer and economist with the World Bank, as well as the former head of tech strategy at Accenture and the former head of strategy for life sciences at IBM. So that is an incredibly diverse background. Julien has a wealth of experience across technology, healthcare, M&A, really all of it. Julien, welcome to the show.
Well, happy to be here.
Now, you have a very diverse background, as we just discussed. Do you want to give our audience a brief introduction into your experience and who you are?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I started my career as a clinician. I have always been passionate about the science of medicine. Um, when I was a little kid, I was very passionate about learning about biology of plants, and living organisms. Then this passion turned into a passion for understanding how the human brain works. So I was very much interested in neuroscience and then the behavioral aspects of humans. So I went to medical school. I got my degree in medicine. So I'm a pediatrician. I went to residency in ophthalmology. When I actually started working in clinical medicine, I realized that I was fascinated by the science of medicine, but not the mundane bureaucracy of, the healthcare delivery one-on-one with patients. So for me, it was a moment when I decided that I want to work on a global scale to ensure access to healthcare for patients that need it. Um, and combined with that, I come from a family of science diplomats. So for me, it was a moment where I decided to combine my work in healthcare economics because I also got a degree in public health and health economics with the work in diplomatic service. And I lived in many countries, over 15 countries. I ended up in Washington, D.C., in the United States. I was doing very meaningful work at the intersection of health policy, economics, and technology and digital here in Washington at the World Bank. And then I moved to the private sector where I um, uh, decided to can bring all of my skills together, skills related to healthcare and life sciences, behavioral profiling, decision making, negotiating, and also helping executives to make strategic decisions that have lasting impact. And today,
Mhm.
I primarily work with C-level executives, family offices, and venture capital or PE firms to make um, rational investments into healthcare or life sciences innovations that are underpinned by technologies.
Awesome. Well, there's so much that we can dive into there. I think a good place to start is by diving into your background and how it impacts the way that you approach business. So, I think you have a pretty unique perspective because you've worked as a diplomat and a doctor. You've been in touch with really the human side of healthcare and technology. So, how does that impact your approach on the business side? How does it inform the way that you talk to these executives and leaders?
Well, clinical and diplomatic work both taught me that healthcare is human. It's unfortunately in the United States specifically, it's political and it's also deeply irrational. Um, Most innovation discussions forget that every health system is designed to avoid loss, not maximize gain, right? Um, Diplomacy trained me to read the unstated interest in the room. Um, I often say that I treat my clients as my patients. the most important skill that you can master in the diplomatic environment is the ability to listen and then the ability to provide rational, logical, insightful advice. Um, so when I think about the digital health and where I started my consulting work once I moved into the private sector in the United States, I realized that the loudest voices often aren't the economic buyers. And I also realized that the patient community is not particularly involved in the shaping of the digital health solutions. So for me, I became sort of a conduit between the patient community who would benefit from digital health solutions and the financiers and financing mechanisms or instruments that would make these investments in innovations. Um, so to date, I've delivered several impactful programs in the digital health space, and most of them forced me to leverage both of my healthcare practical clinical experience, but also it requires a lot of decision making, political navigation, and being very savvy as you navigate the financing, the world of innovation financing.
I'd love to dive into some of those programs that you've launched. But I think a good place to start is what is digital health and how should we think about it? Right? Because I think there's a lot that's kind of baked into that question and into that term. It's different, as you mentioned, across the US compared to someone somewhere like Europe. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's very different in terms of adoption and funding. So I'd love to get your take on that. How would you define digital health as it exists today?
Well, so we call them digital health technologies. So digital health technologies, they offer the ability to deliver personalized care, lower barriers to access, and positively impact health outcomes. Um, Digital health technologies often are regulated as medical devices. In Europe, they are often referred to as digital medical devices or DMDs. Um, And I believe that this is a category of medical products that will fundamentally shift how healthcare is delivered globally. Because digital health technologies provide national but also local healthcare systems with this opportunity to deliver at scale personalized care in patient and clinician determined settings. So they can enhance care independently but also work in conjunction with pharmaceuticals or clinician delivered therapies or other medical devices. Like, for example, we do have now a regulation that came out of the FDA a year ago or 2 years ago, where a software product can accompany the pharmaceutical to augment the effect of those pharmaceuticals, right? So, for example, if you have a medicine that we traditionally notice low adherence to, you can develop a digital health solution that ensures a person's adherence to that pharmaceutical. This is a significant change. It may not sound as impressive as one would want, but still, it is an innovation. For example, it is a very innovative approach to managing health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that you're touching on a big opportunity, right? I think that software can be a huge enabler from a lot of different sides and directions. It can be helpful for the patient, for example, and maybe medication management and making sure that they don't have conflicts with their medications. Those could be surfaced to a patient, whereas before you might have had to read all the fine print. So I think that that's a really interesting aspect of healthcare innovation. And I'd love to understand from you, because I think innovation in general is challenging across industries, especially in healthcare, which is so highly regulated. What do you think are the biggest opportunities? How should we be thinking about innovation today?
Well, today innovation is there are two aspects to it. There is a business aspect to it and there is a human aspect to it. So we live in a world where every day new technologies keep emerging. Um, One way to stay ahead of the curve and uh, to at least stay on the curve is to start adopting those technologies or new scientific approaches or methods into the products that people actually use, right? Um, Innovation from the patient perspective is necessary because people are entitled to having access to those innovations that they would benefit from directly. From the business perspective, if you look at the competitive advantage, and I do a lot of work in competitive intelligence, if you're not innovating, you're going to be behind the entire sector very quickly. And healthcare and life sciences sector is a rather conservative sector for many reasons, one of which is regulatory authorization, regulatory frameworks, ethical concerns, and ethical regulations. It doesn't mean that if we want to accelerate innovation, we need to disregard those, even though we now are seeing the open discussions around, innovation coming from China in the healthcare and life sciences space, where the speculation is they may be, circumventing certain regulation or ethical principles. So we can do this in the Western world. But innovation here in the Western world is tied very closely to the survival of the business. And if you're not, for example, now everybody is focused on artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI. And one would say that you should be very focused as to how you approach these pilots or investments into these technologies. Some companies say that we don't have discretionary cash to invest into certain into these pilots, but you have to because your competitors are going to be investing. They're going to be producing new products that will have new attractive features to the patient community, for example, and patients will vote with a dollar, so to speak, right? And I look at, I will not be naming any companies, but for example, if you look at the glucose monitoring market in the United States specifically, it it's a digital health technology. Um, there are three, four players in this space in the United States. Um, One company decided to innovate aggressively. They went above and beyond the technology aspect, which is the sensor that senses the level of glucose and other parameters. Um, they went above and beyond. They developed a mobile application. There is a predictive function. Now, some companies have the opportunity to connect it with the insulin pump. So you have to be innovating, and the patients don't care about the technologies that you use, right? Patient doesn't care if you use artificial intelligence or generative AI in your products, but what they care about is convenience, comfort, um, the pain level, right? Is it painful to install this glucose monitor? How frequently do I have to change it? Every 7 days or every 14 days, right? This 14-day interval makes it much more attractive than a 7 day. If you have a predictive function that allows me to monitor my glucose level and choose what I eat, that's what I care about. The technologies are secondary. But the point is, the innovation is at the center of the business survival today.
For sure. And I think you've raised a lot of good points there. One is innovation really matters in so much as it centers the actual need of the person who's receiving the technology. generative AI is the buzzword, but if you're not applying it to something that's meaningful for the end user, then it isn't necessarily giving you the result, the success, the revenue that you want to see from it, right?
Mhm.
And I would love to understand more about some of the programs that you've run, kind of the challenges that you've seen and what really influenced your success in such a competitive space.
So when I think about the innovative programs that I helped drive with my clients, um, there are two major stakeholders in those programs. Um, it's the board of directors and it's the C-suite. And when you think about it, boards make funding decisions. Boards care about profitability. Boards care about competitive advantage. So what is happening right now with the generative AI, for example, agenda is boards want C-suite to be driving generative AI pilots across their organization, whether it is for operating efficiencies or for product innovation. What happens is the teams on the ground get overextended. They have day jobs to run. They have normal business as usual that needs to be still accomplished, right? So the generative AI pilots become sort of an afterthought. So what I've seen so far is most pilots um, around around generative AI and artificial intelligence, other techniques, they fail. First of all, pilots are often used as optics,
Hmm.
right? We're doing this so so our CEO sees that we're doing this. And we're doing this because the board asked us to do, so that we're running this, but we actually have no intention to scale this technology within the enterprise. I have seen this so many times. There is no these are still siloed initiatives. A lot of generative AI pilots in the healthcare, they're focused very much on the operations aspect. But we rarely think about breakthrough innovation using this technology, right? There are a few biotech small companies, they're no longer startups, that do AI drug discovery. So
Hmm.
this is where I think about innovation, um, true breakthrough innovation driven by generative AI as a technology, right? Versus, let's transcribe doctors' notes faster. And actually, in fact, we know that this transcribing doesn't really help either nurses nor doctors. Um, Another thing that I've noticed is there's rarely input from the payers. So
Hmm.
when we think about the digital health technology specifically, we need to start thinking about the policy full stack. So what is it going to take this idea of a digital health technology all the way to the patient so that the patient can experience this digital health technology without incurring expenses or with some co-payment, for example, right? So when I think about the policy full stack, um, it includes regulatory authorization. It includes product value assessment. You have to know um, you have to know what the value of this technology is going to be and how much we should be reimbursing this, right? Then the third function is pricing and reimbursement. And then finally, it's patient access infrastructure. Are patients actually going to benefit from this technology? How they're going to access it? And quite often, um, all of this becomes an afterthought.
Mm.
There's also quite a lot of experiments that I'm seeing where um, pilots are happening, but teams know that there is no budget to scale these pilots if they are successful. or they know that there is no clear owner after the pilot. Let's say we piloted this technology, we have a use case, we're ready to go into scale and production, but who's going to own it? Because the person who was running the pilot usually has a very busy day job,
Mhm.
right? And finally, I think there are a lot of pilots that sort of bolted on top of existing workflows that are dysfunctional
Mm.
because especially if you look at the healthcare system in the United States, it has been patched and patched and patched. Some solutions have been added on top of other solutions, and today it's a just a giant systemic error, essentially, right? So you have to be really rethinking the processes and workflows within the healthcare, not just organization, but also within the healthcare to make these technologies actually successful.
I think it's one of the challenges that I don't think anyone was really prepared for. It's hard for businesses to understand their own workflows and their own systems. And I think you can look at something like healthcare, which has so many complexities between the people who are developing the technology and where it ends, where it lives with patients or buyers or payers. And thinking through that entire system, all of those processes, getting the buy-in from the right people, looking at it as a long-term investment, I think that's hard to do, to your point. And
Mhm.
we don't necessarily have the foundation and the infrastructure figured out for people to do that effectively at the pace that this technology is developing.
Exactly, but we have to figure this out because the future, if I think about the digital health, right, the future is definitely digital.
Mhm.
And when we think about digital health today, it's a lot of it is telehealth. And when I think about digital health, it's much broader than telehealth. That we need to be solving for all of those problems that you mentioned to enable very different software as a medical device applications for digital health um, that patients can afford, that are accessible to them wherever you live, whether you are a rural health practitioner and you may not have an iPhone of the latest kind, but you have a an older phone that still can handle the digital health app that you're entitled to, right?
Mhm.
But also we need to ensure that the systems on the clinician side, because electronic health record systems and the interoperability story in the United States is a significant. It's a it is its own saga that we have to get through. So how to seamlessly integrate all of the above in a
Mhm.
secure manner, this is something that we need to be focusing on. And I urge when work with my clients, I um, always tell them that these pilots and many clients are too often, MVPs, minimum viable products in the name only.
Mhm.
Usually they're not viable, not integrated, and not budgeted. So if we are serious about adopting new technologies, my suggestion is that we need to be very focused. You can't be putting all of your eggs across all the baskets. You have to really figure out where you can get the biggest bang for the buck and focus on those no, on those use cases with precision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've talked, or you've talked a lot about here are the challenges, right, with developing successful pilots. You've been on both sides. So from the perspective of an investor or, maybe an enterprise who's funding these different pilots, what makes a pilot stand out and what makes it worthy of further investment of either resources or capital?
Well, when you think about the investment community, whether it is venture capital or private equity, well, let's say venture capital is more involved in the early stages of digital health
Mhm.
solutions. Everybody wants two things. One, of course, return on investment, right? The bigger the multiple, the better. But that means that someone has to pay for that digital health solution in the end. If this solution is going to be, let's say, reimbursed by payers. So you have to really be thinking about the reimbursement strategy very early on. It cannot be done, when you already have a product. And now let's think about how and who is going to be paying for it, right? The second, you want something that patients actually want. I think a lot of the digital health solutions that have been in the market, they did not succeed because they were really good experiments for the people who started those pilots and started those digital health solutions, but they were not addressing problems that either clinicians or patients were really facing, right? So, what investors want, they want you to show that you actually have a client, such as patient, for example, right? Patient input buy-in into your idea. You have the solid foundation that proves that this problem that we're trying to solve is actually a viable problem. Everybody wants this solved, so there is market for it. So there's going to be uptake for it. Two, you need to show that what technologies you're going to use. Investors want you to use artificial intelligence. However, you probably saw this on LinkedIn and other platforms. A lot of venture capital firms, they're complaining now that every single pitch they hear has artificial intelligence in it. And once you actually start looking under the hood, there's oftentimes there's no artificial intelligence there, right? It's just named that way. So, but the investors want to use modern technologies that are scalable and that will last. And three, when it comes to investments, I think I'm seeing the increasing demand for understanding the quality of the team that is building those solutions. And, given my background, I have done and keep doing a lot of behavioral assessments and behavioral analysis interviews of the founding teams, specifically, commissioned by either the venture capital or individual investors or family offices. They want to make sure that they are betting not on the right technology and an idea, but they also have the right people who are able to execute effectively. And historically, a lot of innovation has come from scientists at heart, researchers at heart. And these are great ideas. But very often, these ideas, they do not have commercial viability. They are great projects um, for the purpose of science, but they're not great commercial projects. So that is why it is very important when you have a founder who is a PhD in physics or PhD in biology geek, it is very important to give this person freedom to create, but to have a business operator that will be driving the organization forward. And a lot of the behavioral assessments, they are specifically to find that right person who will be the business operator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that kind of gets to the question of here are the things to look at, right? If you're an investor, so if you're building out maybe a healthcare portfolio, you haven't necessarily been in that space before. On the organizational side, how can these larger companies, larger health tech companies who are maybe working in skunkworks trying to develop a couple of different pilots, how can they balance innovation against the need to generate product revenue? I think you've touched on there's a competitive element here. They need to innovate to stay relevant. But how do you manage across all of these different streams and different priorities?
So my motto is that you have to be focused on every podcast I go to when I talk about the business success and business and what business leaders should care about. You always have to be focused. So one example I will tell you is I recently saw an interview with the CEO of Eli Lilly, um, Dave Ricks, and one of the questions to him was, "What made Eli Lilly successful?" And he said, "What made us successful is focus. We never pivoted from what we are good at. We always focused on what we're great at, and we kept hitting this target over and over again, right? And hitting the target in a very focused manner over the past 25 years led to the obesity drugs that are now available to public and are in the market, right? Once you start pivoting from your core business, you better have a very good business case that this is exactly the investment you want to be making. So whenever I go to a executive that says that we want to develop a digital health solution to do X, Y, and Z, my first question is, do you really want to be pivoting away from where you should be focused because this is your core business versus making these investments? I will tell you why. Because we now live in a world of partnerships. It is much better to make an investment into a smaller company that will um, work sort of in parallel to you. There is a concept of ambidextrous organization, is where you have the fully fledged organization that runs the pilots, but it's sort of a separate entity, but still reporting to the same manager um, as the rest of the department. But you want to make these investments into startups so that they are focused on what they are great at,
Hmm.
and then adopt, either buy, license, or what have you, these organizations for yourself. Or there are consulting firms, for example, my I used to work for Accenture, um, and I think when pharmaceutical companies partner with Accenture, for example, Accenture can, for example, create a digital application for you, right? You don't have to master those skills. And in fact, after they create that application, they can actually help you manage that infrastructure for you so you actually focus on the drug development, right? And not the digital health development. So focus is remains a priority. So that is why when I think about the innovations, first thing that you need to do is you need to figure out, okay, these are 100 use cases that um, will potentially benefit from technology, whether it is generative AI, machine learning, or in 10 years it's going to be quantum computing. Um, but we can't pursue all 100 use cases. So let's figure out what are the use cases that will lead to breakthrough innovation that is in line with the core of our business. And this is where I would put my money on. Everything else should be outsourced in the form of partnership or licensing.
Got it. No, I think that's really good advice. And something that is really easy to fall prey to. Oh, this is a new technology. This is the new use case. It's all very shiny and exciting, but you have to put a stake in the ground somewhere.
And one thing I want to say in addition to this is when you look at the large companies like big pharma or big healthcare insurance companies, they have a lot of money to spend. So it sounds bad, but they can't afford to waste some money,
Mhm.
right? When you are a startup, sometimes I recently spoke with one of the founders, and he is preparing for a pitch to the next investor, and he says, "We're doing X and Y and Z, right?" And I told them that, well, you're not doing X great, you're not doing Y great, and Z is very nascent, right?
Mhm.
So before you go to the invest, and you don't have the money, right? And if you're asking me as an investor to invest in you, I want to be sure that you know what you're doing. You're very focused on one thing, right? You want to be focused only on X, not Y and Z. Um, when you're a startup, you can't afford to waste money,
Hmm.
especially when the money is not yours, right? And the larger companies, they can afford to do that.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a really good point too. Focus, I think, is important for everyone, but when you have limited funds, it's even more critical. Now, Julian, I know we are coming close to the top of the hour for our podcast. Is there any nuggets of advice or information that you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, if you are thinking about innovation and innovative ideas, I think you need to treat digital pilots like venture capital portfolios. You need to prepare that many of your pilots will absolutely dramatically fail, but everyone should teach you something valuable. And I think you always need to ask yourself a question, would we still build this if a competitor did it first? Um, I also think that, and emphasize this, that especially when you're a startup, you have limited resources, and that is why you need to hire the best talent in the market, not because they are good at their job or because they have so and so credentials. Um, Revenue and innovation are not enemies, but mediocrity and misalignment are. So you need to have the right people that will work together very well, one. And two, you need to have a leader who is a business operator, not afraid of making bold decisions that will last.
I think that's such a good way to put it is to look at digital pilots like a portfolio for a venture capital firm. I think that's a really salient way to express it. Now, Julian, thank you so much. This has been such an informative conversation, and I've been thrilled to be a part of it. Listeners, I hope you are getting some really good insight into digital health pilots, why they fail, and maybe now you know how to not fail, how to succeed in this, and to win in a really competitive market. Now, if you're interested in following Julian and learning more about his insights, you can check out his website, julienwillard.com. That's JulienWillard.com. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, listeners, thank you for tuning in. I am looking forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye.